This film will try to explain what happens if a large country imposes a tariff on the import. The difference between a large country analysis and a small country analysis is what we see here when we look at the supply from the world. In the small country analysis, that was a perfect elastic horizontal line, but in this case the large country has a great impact on the world market, and therefore it will have an effect of the world market price. So it's not a constant. So if this large country imposes a tariff of that size, that's gonna shift the supply curve from the world upwards with the size of the tariff, like that. The marginal cost of each imported unit will shift up, increase with the size of the tariff. And therefore we will end up with a new equilibrium, and therefore we will have a reduced consumption due to the case that the consumers now will have to pay a higher price. And of course, since we're receiving a higher price for the production, the producers are willing to sell more. We still make the simplest assumption here and say that we have a perfect competition market, of course. So the increased price here from the original one up to P1 will increase the production from the original one to the new one. Okay, we'll look at the areas A1 and A2, and that are, of course, A1 is the increased producer surplus due to the case that they are now selling the original quantity to a higher price, and A2 is the increased producer surplus due to the case that they are now producing more to a price that is equal to or higher than the marginal cost of these units. These two areas are also losses to the consumers, so it's a loss of consumer surplus due to the case that the consumers now have to pay this higher price for these units than they did originally. The consumers will also lose the areas B and D. D is the reduced consumption in units, so that's a total loss, of course, since we are not longer consume those units. And the area B is a loss in consumer surplus due to the case that we are now producing these units to a higher cost than it should be done if we had produced them in another country than in our own. And then we have the area C, which is a consumer surplus loss, but it's also part of the tariff revenues to the government. As we can see here, this is the size of the tariff on the right hand side here. But if we deduct that from this one, we're going to end up down here. So this is just part of the total tariff revenues, which we see here. When we take away the tariff from the price P1, we're going to end up in the net price of P1 minus T. So we see here that we will have this area E, which are this part of the tariffs for the imported goods. That is also gain to the government. So when we look at this netly, we see here that B and D are the net losses for the consumers, and E is a gain to the government. So when we add them all together, we see that the change in consumer surplus will be a negative A1, A2, B, C, and D. The producer surplus will be a positive A1 and A2. So A1 and A2 goes plus minus 0, of course. And then we have duty revenues that is equal to C plus E. So the net effect in this country will be E minus B minus D. So depending on which of these areas that are the largest, we see that we can have a net gain or a net loss. So if E is smaller than B plus D, then we have a net effect that is a negative, and if E is larger, which looks like in this example, larger than B plus D, then we have actually a gain in this country when they introduce the tariff. Okay, let's calculate a little bit on it. We have this supply world, and we introduce a tariff of 200, so we will have a supply world with tariff, that light green version. We have original price of 200, we are producing 1500 units, and we are consuming 9000 units. When we introduce the tariff, the domestic price will increase to 300, and therefore we're going to have a reduction of the consumption down to 8,200 units. The production will increase from 1500 up to 2400. So A1, A2 will be the positive changes of producer surplus. A1, A2, B and D together with C will be the loss in consumer surplus. And area C will also be a part of the governmental revenues from the tariff. So we see here that when we take away the tariff of 200 from the domestic price of 300, we will end up with a net price of 100. And therefore we will have this area E, which also is a governmental revenue. So if we calculate them, we're going to see that changes in consumer surplus are a negative minus 860,000 in this case. The positive change of producer surplus will be 195,000, and the duty revenues to the government will be 1,160,000 in this example. So we actually have a net positive effect of 495,000 due to the case that we have actually introduced a tariff to a large from a large country to the import from the world market.